Hi boys and girls. Our next question says, Josan and Andrea are on a long distance bike ride. They decide they will stop for water if either of their bottled water is less than half full. Josan's bottle is 2/5 full. Andrea's bottle is 5/6 full. Should they stop? So that means we're going to see if either fraction, where they lie, and where they compare to 1/2. So before we can do that, let's make our fractions equivalent to help us better understand where they are in comparison to 1/2. Now right now our denominator is 5 and our denominator is 6. So we want to do what? We want to find our least common multiples of 5 and 6. Let's quickly go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that we have found our multiples of 5, our denominators 5 and 6, we can look and see that our least common multiple will be what, boys and girls? Our least common multiple will be 30, because 30 is the lowest number that is the same in both sets of multiples. So now that we have found our least common multiple, we can go ahead and make our fractions equivalent. Go ahead and do that on your own now. Alright, boys and girls, so if you look to the right of my screen, we have now made our 2/5 and our 5/6 equivalent fractions. And by doing so, we had to multiply 2/5 by a like fraction, 6/6, and that gave us 12/30. And to make 5/6 equivalent, we had to multiply by a like fraction, 5/5, which gave us 25/30. Now, I went ahead and I drew a number line, because remember in math, we can find our answers in several different ways, whether it be drawing models or using a standard algorithm. So the model that I drawn was a number line. So I have my number line from 0 to 1. And I broke it down in increments of 30 equal parts because my denominator is 30. And I want to compare where each fraction is compared to 1/2. And I have 1/2 right here. So we want to see if either one of their bottles is more than half full or less than half full, because our question tells us that they decided to stop if either one of their bottles is less than half full. So, Josan's bottle we know is 2/5 full. Now, 2/5 full is equivalent to 12/30, and 12/30 is right here on our number line. So that means 12/30 is less than half full. Now let's go ahead and look at Andrea's bottle. Andrea's bottle is 5/6 of the way full. We know that 5/6 is equivalent to 25/30. 25/30 is right here on the number line, and that is more than halfway full. So that means we know that we will have to stop for water because Josan's bottle is less than halfway full. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write out our explained thinking and our understanding right here in the solution area. So our explained thinking says, yes, they should stop. Why should they stop? Andrea's bottle is more than half full because 5/6, which we know is equivalent to 25/30, is more than halfway full. But Josan's bottle is less than half full because 2/5, which is equivalent to 12/30, is less than 1/2. Write this down in your packet, and let's move on to the next page. David grew 1 3/4 inches last year and 1 5/8 inches this year. Estimate how much he grew in 2 years. So you can estimate 1 3/4 plus 1 5/8 using benchmark fractions. The number line below shows common fractions used as benchmark fractions to estimate sums and differences. So as we see here, they have drawn a number line, and we know in order for us to find out how much he grew in 2 years, we must add both fractions together. But before we add them, we're going to estimate. So we already see that 1 3/4 is represented here on a number line, but 1 5/8 is not. So in order for us to find 1 5/8, we need to see how close 1 5/8 is on our number line to 1 3/4. Now, in order for us to do so on our number line, I see that my number line is broken up into fourths. So what I will do on my number line is I'm going to break it up into eighths. So let me do that now. So I've broken my number line up into eighths. So now I can see where 1 5/8 is. So 1 5/8, we have our one whole number, and we're going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1 5/8 is right here. So we're going to use the benchmark fractions but I know that 1 5/8 is a little greater than 1 1/2, which is right here. So I'm going to use 1 1/2 to estimate. So I know that 1 3/4 plus 1 1/2 equals 1 3/4 plus 1 2/4. Why? Because we had to make 3/4 and 1/2 equivalent. In order to do so, we had to turn our 1 1/2 and multiply it by 2 to give us 1 2/4. Now we can add them because our denominators are the same. So we add our whole numbers together first. 1 plus 1 gives us 2. We add our numerators. 3 plus 2 gives us 5. And remember, our denominators stay the same. Now our answer is 2 5/4, or 3 1/4. Now why did it change to 3 1/4? Because 5 over 4 is an improper fraction. So we must fix that. So 4 can go into 5 one time. That 1 must be added to our other whole number 2, which gives us 3. And we have 1 left over, and our denominator stays the same. So the sum is a little greater than 3 1/4. So David grew a little more than 3 1/4 inches. Again, boys and girls, remember this is just an estimate. This is not our exact answer. So the question asks us to explain how we know that 1 5/8 is a little greater than 1 1/2. How do we know? I know 1 5/8 is a little greater than 1 1/2 because I broke my number line up from fourths to eighths. Then I identified that 1 5/8 is greater than 1 1/2. And that explains what we did up here on our number line. Now, next question says, find the actual sum of 1 3/4 plus 1 5/8 to determine how much David grew in 2 years, and explain how do we know our answer is reasonable. Now, before we can add, we must do what, boys and girls? We must make both of our fractions equivalent. And in order to do so, we must find what? The least common multiple of our denominator 4 and 8. So let's find our factors. Now our factors are multiples of 4 and 8. So we have our factors of 8 and 4, and we see that our lowest common multiple for 8 and 4 will be 8. Now if we look at our multiples, we see that 16 is also a multiple, but it's not the lowest multiple. So again, we're looking for the lowest multiple of 8 and 4, and it is 8. So now that we know that our denominator needs to be 8, we can go ahead and make them equivalent. Now I see that one of our fractions already has a denominator as 8, so we don't have to do anything to it. But we must make 1 3/4 equivalent. So go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I went ahead and we made our 1 3/4 equivalent. So to do that, we had to multiply it by a like fraction. The like fraction is 2 over 2, which gives us 1 6/8. Now we had to rewrite our equation. So our equation now is 1 6/8 plus 1 5/8. So when we add, we always add our whole numbers first. So 1 plus 1 is 2. We add our numerators next. 6 plus 5 gives us 11. And again, our denominator stays the same. Now, there's something that's a little off. Our fraction is what, boys and girls? It is an improper fraction. So in order for us to make it correct, we need to see how many times does 8 go into 11. 8 can go into 11 one time. So that 1 needs to be added to our whole number 2, which will give us 3. And how much do we have left over? We have 3 left over. And again, our denominator stays the same. So our final answer will be 3 3/8. Now we need to explain if our answer is reasonable compared to our estimate. And our estimate, we estimated that he grew 3 1/4 inches. Now, is 3 1/4 inches close to 3 3/8 inches? It is. So that means our answer is indeed reasonable. So let's go ahead and write our answer in the solution space below. So you should have written David grew 3 3/8 inches in 2 years. I know my answer is reasonable because 3 3/8 is a little greater than my estimate of 3 1/4. Write this down in your packet and let's move on to the next page. Our next question says Irene makes 4 2/3 cups of pancake batter. She splits the batter into 2 bowls. She mixes blueberries into 2/4 cup, 2 1/4 cup of batter and walnuts into the rest of the batter. So we must estimate how much of the batter has walnuts in it and explain our estimate. So we know that she starts out with 4 2/3 cup, and she uses 2 1/4 cup for blueberries. So I'm going to estimate that she has about 2 1/2 cups left. Why? Because I know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So I'm going to think that I have about a 1/2 cup left. So let me write out my response below. So your answer should say, I estimate that there should be about 2 1/2 cups of batter left for walnuts. Question 4 says, find the actual amount of batter that has walnuts in it and explain how you know your answer is reasonable. Now, boys and girls, when we read our question, we see that there's a key phrase that says she splits the batter into 2 bowls. Now remember, when we have word problems, there are always going to be statements there that are there to trick us up. And I know that you would think that I should divide 4 2/3 in half, but we're not, because we know that there's already 2 1/4 cups being used, so we must find the difference to find what is left. So we're going to subtract 2 1/4 from 4 2/3. Now before we can subtract, we need to make our fractions what? Equivalent. That's right. So we must find a common denominator. And before we can find the common denominator, what must we do? Find our multiples of 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and do that now. So to our right, we have our multiples of 4 and 3. And as we see, the least common multiple is 12. So we know our denominator needs to be what? 12. Now we can go ahead and we can make our fractions equivalent. Do that now. All right, boys and girls, so again, before we can subtract our fractions, we had to make them equivalent. So we made 4 2/3 equivalent by multiplying it by a like fraction, 4 over 4, which gives us 4 8/12. And we multiply 2 1/4 by a like fraction of 3 over 3, which gives us 2 3 over 12. And again, whatever we multiply our numerator by, we must multiply our denominator by. Now we can go ahead and subtract. So we have our equation, 4 and 8 over 12 minus 2 and 3 over 12. We always subtract our whole numbers first. So we're going to subtract 4 from 2. And 4 minus 2 is 2. Then we subtract our numerators. 8 minus 3 is 5. And our denominator stays the same. So we know that there will be 2 5/12 cups of batter left for walnuts. Now we need to see if our answer is reasonable compared to our estimate. So we estimated that there will be 2 1/2 cups left for walnuts, and our answer was 2 5/12 cups. So our answer is reasonable based on our estimate, because 2 5/12 is close to 2 1/2. So let's go ahead and write that down in this space right here to explain. So our explained thinking is there is 2 5/12 cup of batter that has walnuts in it. My answer is reasonable because 2 5/12 is close to my estimate of 2 1/2. Go ahead and write this down, and let's go to the next question. So the last question says, Irene makes a second batch of 3 1/4 cup of pancake batter. She wants to know how much more batter she made in the first batch. She estimates the difference between the sizes of the two batches, 4 2/3 minus 3 1/4, is 2 1/12. Explain why this estimate is not reasonable. So again, we're basing this question is based off of the question above right here. So we know in the first batch she makes 4 2/3. The second batch, she uses 3 1/4 cup. They already estimated it for us, and we already know that our estimate is not reasonable based on the correct answer. So we need to go ahead and subtract 4 2/3 from 3 1/4 to find out if our estimate 2 1/12, why it is not reasonable. So go ahead and do that work on your own and complete questions 1 through 5 on the last 2 pages of this packet. Once you are complete, you must click on the link below this video to take a short quiz for lesson 11.